So once again, thank you everyone. I trust you all very well. Thank you for taking the time out to be here on this PCB organized webinar on artificial intelligence and data privacy and how do we navigate compliance to these two big things in Africa. They're actually applicable globally, but our focus here is how do we do these two things, artificial intelligence and then privacy and data protection, especially in Africa as it is. So once again, this is a PCB organized event and it's our pleasure to be here. We're going to go through all this in the next 40 minutes. So you should hold your chairs and hang on tightly because there's a lot that we're going to cover within the next 45 minutes thereabout, and then we're going to have some time for questions and answers. But even as the questions and answers come to mind, please drop up your thoughts, your comments in the chat room, and we will respond to all of them at the end of this webinar. So I'm Dr. Orlando Olumide Odejide, and I'm the managing partner at A4S. I'm certain that if you put my name somewhere inside of Google, it should bring you to me, and then hopefully you'll see the various things that I'm working on and I've worked on over the last 24 years, 25 years of my life working around these same things. I also have my colleague, Musa, who's the chairman at Sentinel Africa, and they cover a lot of the East Africa, even Southern Africa. And he's a friend, and he's also a colleague, though a very big industry guru when it comes to many things that are related to IT, governance, risk, and compliance. So both of us will be leading this session. And so once again, thank you very much, everybody, for taking the time out to be here to join this webinar. Let me go straight into it. So I will leave my colleague Musa. He will deal with the artificial intelligence side of things, while I will focus on the privacy and data protection side of things. And I'll do it very quickly because we don't like to exceed the time that has been allocated for this particular webinar in itself. So once again, I'm Dr. Orlando, and we're here on behalf of PCB, and thank you very much, everyone, for being here. So the first thing I want to say to everybody very quickly is that privacy is actually one of the human rights. It's one of the human rights, the articles. A lot of people are unaware of that. They think that privacy is like fashion, or it's like just something that is tied to the regulator, or something that's somebody just dreamt of one afternoon. But that the birthplace of privacy in itself is the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. It's among one of those rights, and it's Article 12, and that's why we've highlighted it here. So that is why every country in the world, and especially the 54 countries of Africa, in reality, or each country must have its own privacy and data protection guideline, act, law, whatever it is that you want to call it, because that shows their commitment to ensuring the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights is appropriately implemented, even in their own country or in their own domain. And I know a lot of African countries have done this already, not all of them, but this is important because it shows adherence and alignment and support for United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And this is the birthplace of privacy. You might think that it's primarily from your government, or if you're a bank, primarily from the banking regulator. No, it is part of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, and great countries around the world and even in Africa are aligned to this by creating a version of this. Another supporting article is Article 8, where it says that, national tribunals for if any of their rights have been violated. And that's why you would also see that in a lot of places, there's a consequence if you violate the privacy of the citizens of that particular country in itself. So it's almost like this whole thing that we almost want tendency to call it IT or to call it information security is actually coming out of social sciences and coming out of the rights of human beings around the world. Let me move on very quickly because of time. So an interesting question that I always like to ask is that, is information security equal to privacy and data protection, right? Because in modern day, I know a lot of information security professionals that who've taken it up that they will also be the data protection officer in their own organization. So is information security, is it equal to privacy and data protection? Is data privacy and data protection, is it meant to be seen as a subset of information security, or information security is a subset of privacy and data protection? And it would be nice to have your answers in the chat room, everybody. There is a chat room that is available, so you can drop your thoughts, you can drop your comments, you can drop your opinion in the chat room. Information security, is it equal to the privacy and data protection? Is it which is the bigger bucket? Is information security the bigger bucket in comparison to privacy and data protection, or privacy and data protection is a much bigger bucket than information security? It would be nice to have your thoughts, everybody, in the chat room. The other thing I'm going to ask everybody is, who should be the data protection officer of an organization? Should the chief information security officer of the organization, should that person be driving data privacy and data protection in the organization? Are they meant to be driving it, or they're meant to be contributing towards it? Okay, that's another question. And once again, it'd be nice to get the thoughts and the opinion of everybody. And lastly, will be that what is the difference between privacy and data protection? Are they the same? Are they one and the same? The concept of privacy and the concept of data protection. Can we use those words interchangeably? Is there a line at all that kind of differentiates between what exactly is privacy and data protection? So once again, everybody, please share your thoughts, share your opinion in the chat room. It would be nice to hear what everybody's got to say relative to these questions. But let me move on because of time. And I know that the NIST has got a document around privacy framework, but I know in globally, GDPR is like the main thing, right? This is the first thing that really started driving the conversation around this. It is really GDPR, and this is where everybody really focused on. This is where everybody really started from relative to this, right? So the whole world is it started following the GDPR guidelines, which is for the European states as it is, and the UK, because they're not necessarily a part of Europe any longer. They have their own interpretation of GDPR, and of course, North American countries, the US, Canada, they also have their own privacy documents. I was doing something with the Canadian version of privacy, but yes, this is the one that, especially in Africa, this is what most of us have followed. This is what it is that we're focused on, and it's from this that everybody kind of have developed their contribute. So this is for Kenya, right? And I know there was a company that I was doing some reviews for, and we had to review them. This is the one for Kenya, and Musa is Kenyan, is based in Kenya. I know he's based globally, but yes, and I'm certain that if it was another time, he would also have his own thoughts and his own opinion with regards to how is the country doing when it comes to the implementation of this Data Protection Act, right? Privacy. What is the difference? Once again, remember I had asked the question, the difference between privacy and data protection, right? And most of the countries in Africa have come up with their act or their regulation. Even in Nigeria, they used to have a regulation, now it's become an act. So this is the Kenyan version of it, and it's a great document. It captures everything. And if you're a practitioner in this field, you will see that it kind of aligns to a lot of what it is that has come from GDPR. There's a close alignment with what has come from GDPR. Once again, in Nigeria, and I think I'm unfortunate. I think I've audited the privacy and data protection in about 5 or 6 or maybe 7 African countries. Ghana, Malawi, a couple of others, right? So this is the Nigerian version. So you see that in Nigeria, it was driven initially by NITDA, right? And then later, it's now driven by NDPC. So it's the logo of NDPC that should be there, not NITDA. So you will see that we used to have a regulation. as it is, and now what we have is a full act as a country. So we've got something called the NDPA, and the good thing about Nigeria, right? So this is our own act. This is our Data Protection Act as a country. Once again, it's got very close and tight alignment with the GDPR. The alignment is very close to GDPR in itself, just like the Kenyan version. But this is our own act as a country, and it contains the same things: the principles, lawful basis, the consent as a concept, privacy impact assessment, what exactly sensitive personal data, who are data protection officers, and the like. So it's a brilliant piece of work that has been done. I think one good thing, everybody, that Nigeria has done that most of the African countries have not done, and Nigeria has done this very well, is that Nigeria then recently came up with the implementation directive. Nigeria then came up with the implementation directive, and we're one of the very few African countries that have something like this. That means in Nigeria, we don't just have the act. We have the act on one hand, but we also have like some kind of guidance document. If you're like somebody who practices ISO standards, you will know that there's something called ISO 9001, which is the requirements document, and then there's like a guidance document, which is ISO 9004. If you do ISO 27001, there's a requirements document, but there's another document called the ISO 27002, which is the guidance document, which is exactly what Nigeria has done. So Nigeria has gone beyond just putting in place the act. As a country, we have now provided proper guidance in terms of how do you go about this. So here we now have the General Application and Implementation Directive, and it even just came out this year. So I'm going to join other African countries to learn from Nigeria, to not just have the act in itself, right? So I know people on the call are from different parts of Africa. The idea is that you don't just have the act in itself, you also have some kind of supporting document that provides guidance in terms of how people should do this. And it's very clean, it's very clear, it's been done appropriately, and it's a public document. It's not a secret, it's a public document. And once again, I think all of you should have a look at it. And your country, your organization, even your career will get a lot of good from this particular document in itself. It's very detailed, it's extremely detailed, right? Providing decent guidance in terms of what you need to do to ensure that you implement the act. We're one of the very few countries that have done this, and once again, everybody should do this. Let me round up very quickly. So this is also something that is going to come out, I think, next month. It's coming out either in August or September. There will be a new version of this particular standard. There's the old version, which is aligned to the old version of the 27001. But since the 27001 was updated in 2022, they haven't been able to do this to bring out the new version, but it's going to come out in about another 1 or 2 months. I can promise you that. And once again, it's a supporting document. This particular standard is completely dependent on if you have implemented 27001 in your organization. So that's useful. This is it. This is the highlights of the whole standard in itself. So you can see 8.2, privacy risk assessment and the treatment. You can see 6.2. So it aligns adequately with the new version of the 27001. But you can't do this except you've implemented 27001. You can't. This is very dependent on that, right? And there are many guidelines that we've given, key things that organizations need to know and need to take into consideration if they're going to implement this version of the standard, right? However, there's this other standard which is very less popular. A lot of people don't even know about it. And I believe PCB has a course even around this, right? And it's a privacy framework. And you can adopt this even if your organization has not yet adopted 27001. Of course, you're better off adopting 27001 and then adding 27701 to it. But if your organization has not yet adopted that, then I'm going to enjoin you to look at this particular document, right? And once again, PCB has got a great training course around this, which is the 29100 course, it's a brilliant standard. You can also see here there's some portions of it that are technical. There's some portions of it that are not so technical, right? People think that privacy and data protection belongs to lawyers and compliance officials alone, right? So the green parts have a lot of technicalities involved. The yellow parts don't have a lot of technicalities that are involved. So once again, this is important. This is, if there's one slide you're going to take away, and this is from the document 29100. This is the beauty of that particular document, because it actually states that these are the things that contribute to what you and I will call PII, right? Personally identifiable information. And they've given these 36 specific attributes of PIIs. They were very specific in the document. Once again, it's inside of this standard, and the standard is free for download, everybody. So if you go type ISO 29100 and you add it to a cart, you can download the standard for free, everybody. You can download the standard for free. Inside of the standard, everything that is on the screen, you will find it under, and everything here. They're very specific around these 36 attributes. And your organization needs to worry about, do I have all this information within my databases? Do I have it within my environment? How am I managing all this information? Why am I even collecting all this information in the first instance? Because privacy and data protection is primarily about PII, right? So I like to talk about CIAP. It's no longer CIA, but it's a CIAP because there's a privacy side to it. I also put this up because this is the birthplace of all the problems. Everybody needs to go back to their offices and review all the forms that they have, right? Because if you get, either it is electronic or it is physical, if you're ever going to get into trouble with regards to PII, first is, why am I even collecting all this information and how am I collecting them? And that's where the review of all your business forms, account opening forms, employee onboarding forms, KYC forms, that is where all these things, that is where they do come in. This is another problem that a lot of people have. They end up not doing something called the data protection impact assessment. I've seen so many entities that are doing the filing. In fact, there's an African country, let me not mention their name, that the people have been doing filing for about 10 years and none of them have been filling the data protection impact assessment. They don't even know what it is and they successfully file every year. This is something you should go look into. It's pretty much risk assessment, but risk assessment tied to personally identifiable information. You also all need to go do something called the data mapping in your own organization. What is the data map in your organization? What is guiding how data is collected, how it is managed, and what are all the data related processes in your own organization? You even need to have some kind of data management architecture. I've put some tips in here for protecting your PII, especially on the technology side. And this is why CISO say, oh, this is our line of work. We should be the ones that should be the DPOs, but GDPR says that the CISO is the one that implements the control. The CISO should not be the DPO, according to GDPR. According to GDPR, the CISO should not ordinarily be the DPO. The DPO can be somebody in risk, it can be somebody in compliance, all right, but it should not be the CISO, because the CISO is meant to be implementing all the controls, these technical controls that you can see on my screen. Once again, we'll share the slides with you. Everybody should have some kind of data protection and privacy policy in their own organization. All of you should have this, and it should even be on your public-facing website. And everybody should have a trained and certified data protection officer. And the PCB's got excellent courses for these things that we're talking about. They've got a brilliant course. In fact, about 2 or 3 courses for data protection. Lastly, you should also have dashboards. I've seen these organizations, Logic 2020, they have some great dashboards. They're not the only ones. There are many organizations you can even do Power BI dashboards as it is. So lastly, that's it. Everybody, if you're looking for your big takeaway from my session, this is it. You should go away with these things, right? You should go away saying that I need to get privacy and data protection right in my own organization. I need to do it properly. I need to not just be focused on ensuring that I file successfully, but I need to ensure that I do these things appropriately. The protection officer needs to get trained. Many other persons in the organization also need to get trained. You need dashboards, and hopefully you can do all your filing successfully and appropriately. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to me. I would allow my colleague Musa come on the call, and he will drive the next section, which is about artificial intelligence in itself. Musa, please take it away.
Great, thank you. So, guys, so it's my turn. So Orlando does a good job. It's very difficult to come after Orlando, but I'll try my best. So as he said, my name is Musa Wesuta. I am in Kenya. I am a Kenyan, and I work predominantly for clients around Africa. And I'm glad to be here on this call with you guys. So I'm going to take you over the next 20 some minutes talking about AI. And really, my focus today is not just to talk about AI and just leave it there in the clouds, but actually talk about how would you go around implementing a framework if you wanted to have some way of structure around artificial intelligence in your organization. So just to kick off things, and again, as Orlando said, we have the chat bot there. I mean, we have the chat feature there. Please just put in your comments there. We also have our questions there. So if you have any questions, just make sure you put them there. We'll be able to tackle them after this session. So let's just go right into it. I have a few slides here just to guide our conversation here, and maybe just getting into things and talk about AI. And I know we talk about AI and we've heard about this. Right now, everybody talks about AI, and I know from 2023, first time people started talking about ChatGPT is what people like to call the Netscape moment. Like when Netscape came about in 1995, those of you who are old enough to know this, is when people started thinking about the internet. And then they say, okay, the internet came out in 1995. But the internet had been around for more than 10 years before Netscape came around in 1995 and allowed people a web browser where you could now actually start to use the internet for your own purposes and search things and do ads and all that. Similarly, with AI has been around for quite some time. But then in 2023, when ChatGPT came out, people started interacting. So it gave you a portal, a browser, a feature that you could pop in some questions, and then people started saying, okay, fine, AI has come about. But really, what is AI then? We confuse sometimes AI with automation, because, for example, if you're able to ask, your cooker, your microwave oven, your coffee machine to, make you brew you a cup of coffee at 5 a.m. and then you go to sleep and you wake up in the morning and ding, you have a coffee cup there, that it actually is not AI, because that piece of machine is, doing something that has been programmed. So when you program a machine or a computer or a program to actually do some specific things, then that is not AI. For example, if I want to create a software that can play a game of chess, and so I program each and every computations, right, that could be possible in a game of chess, and then I play against that computer, and then it's able to beat me. I say, oh, this is intelligence. Really, that's not intelligence, because the computer is doing exactly within the realm of all the possibilities that are actually fed it in. Intelligence comes about when you have agency. So now this system is able to make up its own rules. It's able to actually design its own, things that you couldn't think about, right? So that is when we can talk about artificial intelligence. Otherwise, what we had was, it is human intelligence, but then what we're just doing with computing is we are doing it at scale. We're making it more accurate, so you can do the same thing so many times, so much faster, more efficiently, but that is still human intelligence. So what we're talking about here is agency. We're actually talking about a system that can actually make up its own rules, think of its own things, and actually go beyond what a human being could achieve. But now, something that I also like to talk about, when we talk about AI, we need to remember that, I like what the author Yuval Noah Harari, who has written Sapiens and Nexus, for those of you who read up on him, and he actually equates AI to a baby, and he says the way you teach a baby right? Is the way AI is learning, right? So monkey see, monkey do, right? So when you have AI and it is learning in an environment, then you expect that the nature or the behavior of the AI is going to take up according to what is within its environment. Think about when you talk about self-driving cars, and I like to think about this as one of those unique human attributes, the behavior of drivers. Now, I've traveled around Africa especially, and I can tell you for a fact that the way people drive in Kenya is different, and even within Kenya, the different cities, people drive differently. And the people drive in Lagos, I think Orlando, you guys survive by the grace of Mary, Joseph, all those angels that are watching over you. And the way people drive in, Cape Town, right? It's all these things are different. And so if you have a self-driving car, for example, my thinking is then that the way self-driving cars will behave if they were trained in, let's say, Nairobi, would be very different from the way self-driving cars would behave if they were trained in Addis. And they would actually take up the behavior of the environment in which they're in. And so what are we saying? But that's the thing we're saying, that sometimes when we talk about AI, we have to be very careful about what we are teaching. Because again, remember, similarly to the case of a baby, you can tell the baby or the child as many times as you want, lying is wrong, do not lie, do not cheat, do not do what. You can say that as many times as you want. But then if you are the parent and you lie, you cheat, and then they see you doing it, then please don't expect that they're going to grow up and then they're going to be any different from you are. So AI is the same. It learns from what it says. I think you guys remember what happened with Microsoft when they sent out this chatbot. It was called Tay, I think, in 2016, if I'm not wrong. And then in 24 hours, this poor chatbot was talking crazy things, profanities online until they had to take it down, right? So those are the things that are unique, things to think about, even as we talk about AI. Now, briefly, I mean, I've just been talking about this, but we should all know that when we are talking about AI, there's a sequential path to that intelligence we are looking for, right? The first thing, it starts with the data. So we have to deal with massive amounts of data. And so therefore we have to figure out what are the sources of this data. How are we going to be collecting this data? And really what is important to us and what is not important to us. Now this data it's very disorganized and very disparate. It comes from all over. We talk about big data. So we have to make sure that that data is first of all being collected and it's being organized. Now we have even organizations that do this for us, data providers, and we've seen, unfortunately, in the news, there's been those, news about these organizations, especially here in Kenya, where some of these people who are used to train some of these data models have been exposed to some things that and we keep seeing this again and again. I mean, that's the price we're paying for getting this intelligence that we're looking for. However, anyway, after the data preparation is done, we then have to do the training, and we choose a proper model, and this training is done by humans, right? And then after that, we do the evaluation, we fine tune it to make sure that it's actually suitable to what we're looking for, and then the deployment is done. So this is a structured way in which we actually deliver. Now, the thing I want to talk about today is the fact that anybody can, wake up and say, okay, I'm doing something, I'm doing a project related to AI. But the most important thing is, do you have a structured way in which you can do it? Now, one of the things that I always talk about is the beauty or the power of ISO standards. ISO standards come in to give you a structure. They give you a guideline. They give you a framework by which you can do this in a consistent manner. Lando has mentioned, for example, when it comes to data privacy, the NDPA has come up with a methodology or a guideline for you who's trying to set up a data protection framework in Nigeria, for example, to follow. Now, one of the things that is so powerful about ISO is that it helps you with that. So when you have an ISO standard, you're able to actually then use that to create, a repeatable process that you know can be tested, and you know that you're going to be getting an output that is actually predictable. Okay. Now, we were still talking about AI, and we were talking about privacy, and we're saying that yes, there's a point in which the two will meet. Okay. So when we're talking about AI right now and privacy, because these are things that are relatively new, especially in terms of regulation, we have to start to think about them together. So privacy is concerning itself with ensuring that the personally identifiable information of an individual is protected, right? And we have just heard that that is actually a human right. Now, when it comes to AI, we know that AI is trying to emulate and even surpass the intelligence of a human being. And we use a lot of the data that belongs to individuals, that is the PII we're talking about, in training, okay? And we also have to expose a lot of sensitive data to these AI models when we're trying to actually get utility out of it. An example is healthcare. For example, if we're using AI in healthcare, we can use it for doing diagnosis, early detection of things like cancerous cells. And so we are exposing a lot of personal data to these AI models. And so therefore, it becomes very important that we have to consider what are some of the issues around privacy. And some of them, I've just listed them here, including the data dependency, personal information that I've talked about. So we have to remember the issues around privacy. Some of the principles around privacy include data minimization is a principle around privacy. Now, data minimization basically says that you want to make sure that you give them, in terms of processing, you're processing the least amount of PII that is necessary for you to achieve your objective. And so when it comes to AI and AI models, we tend to just flood the thing with data. Now, when we look at the requirements of privacy, it goes against the principle of data minimization. So we have to start to consider that. Then it comes to risks of re-identification. When we are talking about, the golden, destination where we want to get when it comes to privacy is anonymization. And we say data that is truly anonymized is no longer considered personal. Now, when it comes to security of that anonymized data, we have to ask ourselves, now when we have AI, how difficult is it for re-identification to happen, or how easy it is? You can look at it that way. So that is something that we have to consider, and we have to be able to do a risk assessment on that. Profiling, automated decision making, those go without saying. When we use AI, we expect that it'll be easier for us to profile, and utility for AI in terms of profiling, goes without saying. Credit scoring, for example, you're trying to make a decision whether you should, lend, a borrower a specific amount of money. You're trying to make a decision whether you should give somebody some insurance cover. Those kind of decisions are really dependent on how well you profile the customer. And so therefore then comes to bias, right? Because with profiling, if you're not careful, then we get bias going in and affects the decision making, could lead to issues of discrimination. Consent issues, again, I talked about healthcare, use of AI in healthcare. People don't consent. One of the things about consent that is a basic requirement for consent to actually be considered consent, especially when we have capacity or capability for the person who's giving you consent, is that do they really understand what they're consenting to? So the issue of transparency comes in. If we have obliqueness in our AI or our systems, then those individuals who are giving you consent really don't understand what they're consenting to. So that becomes a key issue. Legal and ethical frameworks. I shall talk about the legal frameworks here, and that's what I just want to talk about next, so that we are in good time. Now, when we talked about data privacy, Orlando talked about it at length and mentioned that the EU GDPR was like that set of legislation that came out in covering the EU member states, but really came out outside the EU into Africa specifically. And most of the African states that have taken up data privacy and come up with their own data privacy regulation have actually really, largely, mapped it around what the GDPR has. And I'm not going to say this, but, if you follow news, some people are disparaging the Europeans and saying the only innovation that comes out of Europe these days is regulation. You can say that's right, that's wrong, but anyway, Europeans are really good at regulation, right? So GDPR came out and it was very good, so that, when you see so many member states really just cut and pasting what you have in the GDPR or largely copying, it means that that piece of regulation has really been well thought through. And the sequence by which regulation comes out in the EU, looking at all the member states and the things that go in, that's why they come up with some regulation that's really good. Now, why am I talking about the GDPR? There is a similar AI Act from the EU that has come out. And so we're expecting that similarly with data privacy, my expectation is that the rest of the member states, the rest of the countries around the world, especially Africa, when we are now going into coming up with our own regulations for AI, it only makes sense that we shall look to the EU Act to try and see what can be copied or what can be done, right, to our own environments, to our own jurisdictions, right? So the EU Act came out and it talks about many things, key of them being issues around transparency. So it's very big on transparency. It's very big on high risk systems. It's very big on ensuring the sanctity of customers and their rights, and ensuring that their rights are protected and they're not misused for profit. So those are the things that we're seeing in terms of a timeline. It's basically came out last year. It's still undergoing implementation. The expectation is by around 2027, should see full implementation going into all AI products. And so my expectation is that we shall start to see a push towards something similar, even within our jurisdictions, that is within Africa. Now, interesting thing is we also have an ISO standard, which came out, which is the ISO 42001. Now, what does ISO 42001 help us with? We have some issues. There are some concerns with the current status. We have issues to do with data protection frameworks, which came out before we had issues to do with AI. So they need to be aligned. We look at audits that are carried out, which are very static in nature. They might not really be able to, match up with the dynamic nature or behavior of AI, right? So those are some of the issues we have that we need to be thinking about, and that's why 42001, ISO 42001, which is for artificial intelligence, becomes very key. Some of the other issues around AI, we talked about issues with the applications, right? Are they usable? Things to do with skill, things to do with matching between the objective, the expectation versus what we were doing, the expense, the capabilities, return on investment, those kind of things are actually a big issue. And those are some of the things that make it necessary for us to have a standard. Talked about bias, for example, right? So when you have bias baked into your AI training, you come up with a situation such as this, where if you ask AI to tell you who's a bride out of these two images, most likely to say that one on the left is a bride, the one on the right, maybe not so much, right? Yet we know by looking at cultures that these are both images of brides, just different cultures. So what does the AI do for us? It is structured. I mean, what does AI management system, that is ISO 42001, it is actually called AIMS. So it provides a structured, life cycle. With ISO, we always talk about plan, do, check, act, yeah? So it's that life cycle, a structured way of embedding, the AI management within an organization, right? So it talks about you actually being able to do risk assessments, similar to the ISO 27001 that we know about. We are able to actually now look at a risk-based approach towards implementing AI management within an organization. The standard has the same high-level structure that we are all familiar with. So we have the similar structure with ISO 27001, ISO 9001, similar structures with the clause 4 being clause on context. We have clause 5, which is on leadership, clause 6, which is on planning. And that's where you actually plan the way you're going to do your risk assessments. You come up with a methodology to do your risk assessments. Then clause 7 talks about support, where you have to actually have enough resources. You have competence awareness, communication and documentation. And then the most important clause is around operation, where we actually do AI risk assessments. So the planning was done in clause 6, then in clause 8, you actually do the risk assessment, then you do the risk treatment, and then finally you do an impact assessment. So the impact assessment is similar to the data protection impact assessment in the sense that it's not enough for you to look inwardly and look at risks that are presented to the organization relating to AI, but you then also have to look at the consumers, and you have to look at customers, the users of your AI products, and start to understand what would the impact be on them if this risk were to materialize. So it's similar to the DPI, because in the DPI, what we're also looking at is what is the impact on the data subjects in case there was risk, in case there was a breach, in case something happened to the processing that you're doing of their PII. So it's a kind of a shift towards not just looking inwardly, because remember the risk assessment looks inwardly, looks at what is the impact of uncertainty or the effect of uncertainty on our objectives. So we look at risk assessment that way and say we want to protect ourselves from risk, we want to mitigate risks. But then when you're looking at the impact assessment, we are now focusing on the AI user, and we're trying to see if we had any of these risks that materialized, what would the impact be on them, right? So again, the things that we can talk about some more, as Orlando said, we'll leave out the slides for you guys so that you can look at them and we can engage further, that we can connect and we can talk further, because right now we're just really talking, in very generally. However, if you're implementing 42001, first things you want to do is you want to establish your context. By establishing your context, you're trying to understand what is it that you're doing in your organization, what is making your organization unique. So what are these use cases that you've identified that are for AI, and are there any applicable regulations that you're supposed to be considering? Now, remember, as I've said, the EU already has an AI Act. So if you're looking at working with any organizations from the EU, any data that belongs to citizens of the EU, then you need to start to be thinking about that regulation. However, you also need to start to think forward and start to say, if with data privacy it happened, because the GDPR, EU GDPR was enacted in May of 2018. Then the Kenyan law, for example, came out in 2019, November. The Uganda law came out in February 2019. So you can see that if you were to use that as a precedence, then you can see that, yeah, definitely in 2027, we're expecting full implementation of the EU Act. Then we expect that, soon after, we're going to start to see similar regulation in the rest of Africa. So you need to understand the context, understand what those regulations are, then define your scope. What is the boundary within which you are implementing AI systems? And then as you're defining your scope and objectives, also you need to ask yourself, who are your users going to be? Are you actually establishing AI products that are supposed to be used internally for your own organization? Are they internal facing, or do you have users who are external? So are you building something that is going to be used by outside, people who are outside the organization? So that becomes very important and also will lead to the risks. So if we go to risk assessments, we have to take into consideration what your context and your objectives are, because then as we're doing our risk assessment, we're trying to see what are the risks that we're exposed to, that we're exposing users to, right? And we have to consider risks coming from either the models that we have, the interactions we have with modelers, the interactions we have with users, the interactions we have with the regulation, right? And also the data itself and where it's coming from. Then in terms of controls, we have to think about things such as the ethical policies for use of AI, mitigating bias, right? And explainability techniques to improve on the transparency. Then if we have in place 27001, which is the Information Security Management System, then we can actually harmonize some of the controls. Now remember, as Alanda said, 27001 is the Information Security Management System. So we have several information security controls that you're going to be implementing either way. So when you're implementing your 42001, you don't have to redo it. You don't have to, create something that you already have. What you want to do is to actually harmonize and adapt. 27701 is the Privacy Act, the Privacy ISO standard. Same, it also has controls, which you're going to, again, integrate with your AIMS, right? And then you want to continually improve by doing a performance evaluation, by doing internal and external audits, and then by improving. The other good thing about your 42001 is that it actually is certifiable. So you're able to get certified by the third-party certification bodies, right? And then that can actually give you the credibility you want in the market. and also with your stakeholders, and give confidence to those people who are working with you that you actually are implementing AI responsibly, right? So some of the things to take away from this: we want to make sure that we are implementing proper AI management system in our organization. 42001 gives us that clear guidance to follow. And we're talking about things to do with fairness. So fairness is a key issue. With the AI Act, it's very important. Also for 2001, it's very important because we want to reduce issues around bias. Then explainability, meaning transparency as well, so that we can understand clearly how the AI is actually making up this decision, how the AI is coming up to this conclusion. Privacy and security, I mean, goes without saying. Transparency, we need to know, we need to reduce opacity as much as possible. We need to make sure we have a robust system, make sure that we are complying with regulation and such laws and contractual obligations that we might have. Safety must be important for us when we are building AI right from the design phase, and especially controllability. We want to make sure that we don't come to that, that thing that is in all dystopian movies where an AI has been built and then the AI has been presented with a problem, and the problem is, how do I resolve climate change? How do I resolve war? How do I resolve, all this human strife and all this, and then the AI comes to the conclusion that the best way, to resolve these issues is to do away with the humans, right? And then so the AI says, you know what, if I do away with the humans, then I'll have resolved all the issues in the world. So you don't want to get to that point of view. So you want to make sure as much as possible that the AI is still controllable. It is still within the control of a human being. So lastly, to finish up, we have to think about AI and privacy, and we're saying that we don't look at them as disparate things, as separate objectives or separate destinations, right? We actually look at them together. We have to think about AI with privacy. And as we're building privacy, we also have to think about what is the utility of AI to try and achieve some of the things we're trying to achieve with data privacy. The other thing is 42,000 gives us a very clear structured way in which we can implement responsible AI systems, and also helps us to show that credibility with our stakeholders. Then mapping our systems, right? Assessing risks, making sure that we are doing our risk assessments, making sure that we're doing our impact assessments, helps us to always understand the dynamic nature of what is changing in external environment, and helps us to keep ahead, right, of all the risks that we are facing globally, right? So I think with that, let me stop there and allow us to interact some more for the next couple of minutes, so we can actually tackle some of your questions and your comments. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing from here, and then maybe we can take some questions from the audience.
Right. Thank you very much, Musa. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. We've got a couple of questions that have come from the people. Some of them are like responses to some of the questions I was asking earlier. So one of them, the people, and of course, Musa, you can also share your thoughts here. So as I said, right? So let's think about these three concepts, right? So number one is the concept of privacy, right? And then information security, and then data protection. I know for some people these three things they mean the same, but they're not, right? If you listen to me, privacy is part of human rights. So it's not something that is even really like, the privacy of human beings is a human right in itself. So you can't really bring that overall privacy conversation and say that it's a subset of information security, right? So privacy is universal, it's global. Whether your organization is doing information security or not, privacy is a global concept. However, because of the modern day use of technology systems, information security becomes very important, right? So information security is a big deal. Now, when we now look at data protection specifically, so if you pick something like you want to talk about access management and encryption, those things are already under information security. So in a sense, privacy is not under information security. However, when it comes to data protection, there's some portions of it, the technical portions of data protection. Some of them are directly under the information security. Hence, why GDPR says that you can't have the person who is putting the controls in also be the data protection officer of the organization. And then, of course, so who's a great person to be a data protection officer? I'll bring it down to maybe top three. I'll bring it down to risk. No, actually, in order of preference, I'll bring it. Number one will be compliance. Number two will probably be risk, and number three will probably be the legal officer of the organization in itself. At least according to GDPR. Okay, so Musa, please go ahead, share your thoughts.
Excellent. I think for me, I'll just talk about the last bit, so we can go to the next comment, which is the who's the best person. And I think the question asked here is, should we have data privacy? Would you consider a lawyer as a perfect DPO? Is it an IT person or a lawyer? So I think it's neither of them. I don't think it's an IT person nor the lawyer. In my opinion, the lawyer is concerned with interpreting the law, right? But then what I always say is this: when we have different practices within the organization, take for example HR. In most countries, you're going to have a labor law. So your HR practitioner is going to work within the confines of the labor law, right? But you don't expect your lawyer to come and say, hey, I'm the one who's in charge of HR. You're never going to give your HR to the legal guy because they understand the labor law. Am I making sense? So yes, there is a Data Privacy Act, just the same way you have a Labor Act, but then you have HR practitioners, same way you should have data protection practitioners. So you need to actually have data protection as a career. They're practitioners in data protection. And let me tell you the danger with having people who are not practitioners for data protection advising you on data protection, data privacy in your organization. This is what you usually get. Now, we have this interesting thing that happened in Kenya. And what happened was there was an enforcement from the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner, who's a supervisory authority in Kenya, on institutions, bars and restaurants and all these guys who actually, And what happened was one of the restaurants, one of the bars in Nairobi posted images on their Instagram and their socials. And what they were trying to do is usually what these guys do is to just, it was marketing to show that, this place is nice, it's happening, and so come because there's people. Then there were complaints because people are not being asked, and they were using their images for marketing and all these things. So there were complaints, and so because of that, the ODPC took the step to actually issue them with a fine. Now, what happened after that is we saw many of the sports coming up with signs and notices and putting them, and they were written in so much detail that if you step in here, by you stepping in here, you have given us the right to use your image and what, and some of them were using such legalese like in perpetuity and all those kind of things. And when you look at that sign, when you look at that notice, it's basically something that cannot hold water because that's not consent. If consent is supposed to be freely given, I'm supposed to be able to withdraw my consent. So if you're assuming by the fact that I walked into your premise that I've given you consent, then that is not explicit, that's implicit. And that's implied consent does not meet the threshold for consent. Now, when you read that to a lawyer, it looks like, yes, this is something that we can actually take you to court and we'll fight you about. But then if you're a data privacy, data protection practitioner, you look at it and say, what is the impact of sharing these people's images on their social media? What's the impact? If you do that DPIA, then you start to understand, okay, fine, what are some of the countermeasures I can put in place to make sure that I'm not exposing the PII of these data subjects, right? But at the same time, I'm achieving the objective. So what was the objective? The objective was marketing. The objective was advertising. The objective was to show that this place is happening. Is there another way I can show that this place is happening without showing people's faces? And there's technology for that. So you see, because you're a data protection practitioner, your advice to the organization is going to take a different tangent. It's going to be trying to protect the rights of your data subject, but at the same time, trying to achieve the objectives of the organization. But if you're looking at it from the point of view that we're going to fight in court, then your advice is going to be, let's write something that when somebody raises this thing, they will be so confused, and we're going to take them to court. We're going to slap them with some. We're going to sue them. That you get what I mean? So that would be my answer to that. Data protection, we need to understand that it is something that you can actually start to learn. You can train. There's courses on data protection, and you can actually be a practitioner in data protection.
All right. I mean, thank you for that. I think the only other question, because we've definitely run out of time, is somebody saying across Africa. And so this is what I proposed. And I think I've been around Afrexim, I've been around the African Union. We should definitely have an African Union data protection act or regulation or framework. Rather than, I mean, there are 54 countries in Africa, and some of them are really small countries. The right thing really is for African Union to build something, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I've had these conversations, and I even know that there was an initial, so if you go online, I know that there was an initial conversation around how African Union was also working on something around data governance, but it hasn't materialized fully into some kind of act or some kind of regulation or framework. But that's the smart and sensible thing. So affect people who drive in trade across across Africa, ideally should be championing something like this, so that portability and cross-border data flows and every other thing that has been mentioned, they will be easy to do. So yeah, my thoughts. So Musa, maybe you want to quickly take the one on AI. There are two different questions on AI, and so that we can round up.
Okay, so I think some questioners here on AI. Unfortunately, I'm gonna just see what's
said I need to know the impact of AI on information management and AI readiness for organizations to the things they need to do to have AI in the organization. And the last one there is about the training models with synthetic data.
Okay, great. So let's talk about the impact of AI on information management. Now, the thing that I always talk about is when you're building AI models, we're supposed to be solving a certain problem. So the thing is, one of the reasons, I mean, more than 80% of AI projects fail. One of the biggest reasons why they fail is that they don't match the objectives. So the usability, that's what I mean. For example, if you're going to build in Africa today or in Kenya, let me be more specific, self-driving car, you're not solving a problem that exists. So your project is going to fail not because you failed on terms of skills or technology or what, but you failed because you did not match your project to solve a need, a pressing need. But if you look at a need that we have, and then you're looking at using AI to solve that need, then I think you have more chances of success. So the question why I'm touching it on your impact to information management is because we have to think about why do we want to do this AI? What's the problem? What's the problem we're trying to solve? Is it societal? Is it technological? Is it something that is relating to something that is pressing? So that if I have the solution, then I can actually say that, yes, this is something that is needed. Going into the readiness assessment, I think you're talking about, yes, with the readiness assessment, what I've talked about is if you have a guideline like the ISO 42001, it helps you to come up with a very specific way for which to do your readiness assessment. So you don't have to think about a unique way in which you can do it for your own organization. So that's the beauty about ISO standards. They are global, they've been written, they've been discussed, they've been thrashed through. So if you go through the 42001, gives you a very structured way in which you can actually do your gap analysis, and then you can actually come up with a result and say, I'm ready, I'm not ready, okay? The last one, which was on training models with synthetic data. Yes. Yeah. Now, the thing about synthetic data is generated by the AI using statistics, right? So the AI will still generate your data for you, which you can use for training. I mean, good. The only problem with it is, if you look right now at the images, let's just look at images only. The data that is being used for training models that do image recognition a large percentage of it is coming from the US. A very big percentage, more than 40%, comes from the US. So when you look at that, you still are not going to avoid bias, especially if you're in Africa. You're going to use synthetic data, yes, but then as the AI is generating for you that data, it is going to be biased. It's going to be biased towards where it's getting most of it. And where it's getting most of it right now is still from the US. So again, it's not going to be applicable to you. So I would say that we want to build systems that are contextual. So you have to go look at your context, look at what is necessary for you, and then now try to see something you can build that actually works for you. Okay.
All right, so we've come to the end of this session. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. This session is recorded. It's going to be made available on the PCB website. I'm certain that a link is going to be shared with everybody so that you can listen to it. And I also believe that you can actually ask for the presentation directly from PCB as an organization. So thank you very much. Once again, it's great to have everybody here as a teaser. I hope this has been value adding for all of you, as it's been enjoyable for us too. So thank you very much. See you in on future sessions. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.